Welcome to Concerning the Spiritual and Art, a podcast exploring spirituality, consciousness, and the creative process. I'm your host, Martin Benson. All right, welcome back to the podcast, y'all. Today I have Brooklyn-based visual artist Calli Moore with us today. And we began our conversation talking about her upbringing in the Midwest in Iowa. She grew up in sort of a more traditional Baptist background and sort of how that laid the groundwork for her spiritually, but how moving to a place like New York really opened her mind to a whole different kinds of perspectives of the world, and sort of how this bubble that she grew up in sort of burst in a beautiful way and really connected her to the vast, deep traditions that occur all over the planet. We talked about how Ram Dass was a huge catalyst for her in opening her mind to Eastern sort of modes of spiritual practice, and how that sort of influences her process as an artist, how she looks at herself as sort of like a conduit or a channel for these types of images that are intended to really uplift and also connect to these transcendent principles of life, to spiritual connection. And we talk about not only her process for creating those works and sort of how they've evolved, but then also sort of about the landscape of art making today, and how psychedelics and Eastern spiritual wisdom traditions and various sort of therapeutic modalities like breath work are sort of like helping open the door to a bigger conversation about our connection to the greater universe. It was just a really deep and vast conversation about all these sort of spiritual topics that surround the work that she's making. And so I think you're going to really enjoy this dialogue that we had together. So here you go, Calli Moore. All right, Calli, welcome to the podcast. How's it going over there?
Good. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, I'm super pumped to connect with you. And I've been such a fan of your work ever since I've discovered it. I just think it's so beautiful and really enticing and engaging, not only to my senses, but to my spirit. Like I really just feel this deep gravitation to what you're creating. And I'm excited to talk about that. But I'm really interested. I know we spoke on the phone about a month or so ago just to kind of connect before we recorded this episode. And
Mm.
you mentioned sort of how you kind of grew up in more of a stricter Baptist upbringing, and how your transition into New York sort of shifted your mindset. And I'm sort of curious sort of what that experience was like for you from your upbringing in Iowa, moving to a place like New York as an artist, and how those influences have sort of driven your process to get to where you are right now and the kind of work you're making today. So I thought that'd be a good place for us to enter if you want to sort of begin there.
Yeah, definitely. And
Yeah.
thank you for all the kind words about my work. I get so excited when people can feel the energy and can connect with the
Mhm.
work because, that's just what you hope for as an
That's what
artist.
it's all about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up in Iowa, a very small town, Southeast Iowa, and I was raised Baptist. And growing up in Iowa, you think that that is the whole world, especially as a child.
Hmm.
And I had dreamt of bigger cities when I was young, but I didn't really understand what they were. I had an email that was NYC butterfly at hotmail.com.
No Hotmail.
It's
Nice.
like I was manifesting this at the age of 10.
Wow, that's interesting.
But yeah, I mean, growing up in Iowa in a Baptist church, I was taught that this was the only way. It was very black and white, this
Mm-hmm.
is the way or damnation,
Yeah.
essentially. And
Yeah.
it was scary. And I grappled with, that for a long time as I grew and went to college and then graduate school in Washington, D.C., and then made it to my final destination, which was New York.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I entered into a metropolis, I realized there's so many different cultures, and this little part of the Midwest in the United States is not the end all be all. And
Mm-hmm.
there are so many other ways to connect to God or
Mm-hmm.
source or whatever you want to call it. Um, and yeah, I think, being in the city, you're surrounded by so many different people, and it's like you can't ignore it. You're not
Mm-hmm.
in this insular, you're not in a bubble anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I don't know. Interestingly enough, I would talk to my Uber drivers a lot in New York, and a lot of them are from, I mean, they're from all over, but they would play. I remember this one man was playing Indian music, and it resonated so deeply with me. It was like I had, maybe lived a past life in India or something. And I was just like, wow, this is incredible. And this is how this person connects to God. And like,
Hmm.
it just was really eye-opening for me. And then you start to see all of these parallels, and everything's kind of all the same at the end of
Yeah.
the day.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it is an amazing way to sort of like rediscover your connection to spirituality, to relationship, to what we could refer to as God, source, creator. I mean, it doesn't matter what word or label you use. I think when you're connecting and when you're reaching into those spaces, like you just know it's sort of an inherent feeling that is sort of beyond linguistics and words that we can attribute to it. But there are many ways to get there. And, being Baptist, that's one way of doing it. And it's beautiful if that is part of your life and that's what really gets you to connect. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes you can be overly zealous in a way that you push people out of where you want them to go, which I find to be such a paradox when it comes to religion itself. And especially in terms of like proselytizing or trying to like get people to see the world the way you see it. And it doesn't really work that way. um
Yeah.
and so I'm curious for you, like you mentioned like the Indian music that you were hearing, like as you started to be more exposed to different cultures, were there various spiritual traditions that you were learning about that sort of drew you in terms of like maybe resonated with what you understood as a child but like totally reframed it for you?
Yeah, I think, well, I was thinking about this the other day. I can't remember who introduced me to Ram Dass or
Hmm.
how I kind of stumbled upon him. But I know that I really got into him at the beginning of 2020, right as
Hmm.
we were entering into the pandemic.
Yeah.
And his way of connecting to source and his time in India, and I think maybe Buddhism and the Indian
Like yogic traditions, like
yoga
the
traditions,
Vedic.
all of that kind of intertwined together is
Hmm.
kind of what drew me in, and I wanted to learn more about it. But I haven't really connected to one exact thing that
Yeah.
has resonated with me. They kind of all have.
Yeah.
And just hearing it come from a man from, the West, a white man, and his story, and then becoming this whole other being in a way, and connecting to that and to Western culture was, I mean, it just really resonated very deeply with me. He's
Yeah.
so relatable. I mean, I
Hmm.
think he's my guru, honestly. I feel very
Yeah.
connected to him when I listen to
Yeah.
his talks,
Yes.
more
Yes.
so than anyone I've ever listened to before. And so,
Wow.
um,
That's
I,
amazing. I feel the
yeah,
same way. I remember when I discovered the book Be Here Now, like sort of the beginning, the first sort of like illustrated book that he created through his talks and other people helped illustrate back in the 70s. And that was kind of like a big book for people. Almost people look at it like the hippie Bible. I remember I was in college, like some of my friends had that book and like they're like, Martin, look at this page, just look at this one page and read it. And I was like blown away. And I just started like diving down this rabbit hole of all the things that he did and who he was and his life. Even like I was lucky to know him when he was like, no, I never met him personally, but just when he was still alive and still teaching before he
yeah,
passed away a few years back. And I feel the same way as you, Callie, like something about the way he communicated about these universal ideas just really cut to the core of me and really revealed to me this sense of like universality within the spiritual spaces. And that there are different like methods and paths that work for different sorts of personalities and dispositions and people who are brought up in certain environments. And I think that's a beautiful part of life is that there isn't one path up the mountain, there are many paths. And I think
yeah,
he really illustrated that deeply for us in the West. And it's an amazing time that the 60s sort of like spawned not only with like psychedelic culture, but Eastern culture flooding into the West, and how that really influenced a lot of artists and a lot of writers and thinkers. But then somehow in the culture, it kind of got sucked underground. And now
Mm.
we're seeing it pop up again in a
Yeah.
way that's so exciting and beautiful. Not only like people discovering Ram Dass through like social media and the internet, because his talks are everywhere, and everyone out there listening, 100%, any, literally get any book by Ram Dass, listen to any talk, and you'll probably feel what we're talking about here. His ability to communicate about such big ideas in such approachable ways.
Mm.
So I see this sort of shift happening where people are more interested in philosophy, more interested in connecting through direct experience to their spirituality, not just through like words in a book, but through a direct actual experience. So you see that with like psychedelics coming back into the mainstream consciousness or understanding of their therapeutic usage. It's and then also, and now as artists, like lots of artists like yourself who are creating these deeply intentional spiritual works of art, unapologetically, because there was a paradigm where that was kind of taboo. And
Mhm.
so for you, I'm curious like how your spiritual path is leading you to make the work you're making today. Like what are some of the ideas or thoughts that go into like your process making these incredibly luminous paintings that you're working on these days?
Mhm. Yeah, I think when I started to create this work, I was deep in Be Here Now and learning all of these things about 3 years ago. And I was really drawn to the idea of a light source within the work and what does that mean, and luminosity and light and effervescence and
Yeah, exactly.
all
Yeah.
of these things like that I feel internally when I am at this level of connection with source, where I feel at peace within
Mm-hmm.
and I feel connected to Mother Nature, and all of it
Yeah.
is
Mm-hmm.
kind of, it feels like it feels like you're high almost.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to find a way to be able to create that in a visual sense.
Yeah.
And when you do look up, kind of spiritual imagery, it is always like something in the sky,
Mm-hmm.
it
Right.
is this otherworldly, maybe fifth dimensional thing that you're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing. And so that's kind of what led me to what I'm doing right now. And
Mm-hmm.
I've I've been doing a lot of visits with artists recently who are kind of in the same vein as myself, making the same kind of work, similar. And we all talk about being in the flow state, which is that state where everything dissipates, but you're just working, and whatever's happening in the studio isn't necessarily you. You are the
Mm-hmm.
conduit and you
Yes.
are channeling something. And I always think it's like an ego check too, in a way, because you're not, it removes you as the ego from the work, and you're not necessarily taking ownership of the image that you created because you know that you are channeling something.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, part of it is like I have a plan when I go to the canvas, but sometimes it just arrives and I'm like really
Yeah.
surprised.
You have to abandon it, right?
Yeah, but I think
Mm-hmm.
in the art historical sense, when Jesus is depicted in those paintings, it's always he is,
Mm-hmm.
up above everyone with the light source either behind his head or coming out from his body. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of what I'm referencing with my works. But people also see them kind of as explosions, like star explosions, and they are
Mm-hmm.
very celestial in
Yeah,
nature.
definitely.
So,
But there
yeah.
is this like softness. Like I don't get like when you think of like these explosions, there's typically a form of I don't know a better word than like kind of like violence, right? Like this incredibly aggressive, explosive sort of energy. But when I look at your work, there's a softer, more delicate, kind of more of like an orb sort of feeling, like not explosive, but like an emanation. Something's
Yeah.
emanating. And when I look up close, I haven't had the opportunity yet. I can't wait till I do to see them in person. But I love the images that you show of your work up close. Like you're using a lot of texture and you're building the paint in interesting ways, playing with different materials. So I love that tactility that's there within the sort of luminous space that you're creating. But back to your point about like sort of these depictions of otherworldliness or like another dimension or a spiritual realm, it is always sort of depicted in some way as like above, looking upward, it's glowing, there's light, and there's this sense there. And I wonder, like, from my own experiences through like deep states of meditation or through psychedelic openings, like you see a similar kind of mystical experience where light becomes not something that is seen as much as it's felt. It's like an
Right.
energy that you feel in a
Mhm.
way that's novel to like our normal mundane consciousness of seeing light reflecting off a surface or beaming through a window. It's like enveloping all of your senses. And so as a painter, it's interesting to try and like recreate that sort of feeling in some sense. And I can get that even through the screen of your work. So I can't imagine
Yay.
what it's like, in person. Like
Mm.
I'm definitely feeling that sense. And so it's interesting to me, like how you're sort of distilling that feeling of spiritual transcendence or spiritual connection into sort of color and light and a sense of luminousness in your work. And I find a relationship to like I mentioned this to you on the phone, like Christ consciousness, like they had this feeling of that when I looked at them. Is that something you think about intentionally or something you're just kind of noticing in the work now?
Uh, I would say it wasn't intentional, but now it is.
Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
find these things reveal themselves to me while I'm making work, and the more work that I make, I see the patterns, and then I realize that there's meaning to this and intention to it.
Yeah.
I love that though, Christ consciousness, and I think that it's so hard to create something on a 2D,
Yeah.
and for it to feel 3D, 4D, something
Mm-hmm.
you're, like you said, like enveloped in. But that's the goal. So thank you
Yeah.
so much. That really excites me
Yeah.
to feel that. Someone said to me the other day, "Oh, Calli, I feel the energy emitting from these paintings." And that I wondered too if that is not only just visually what I'm creating, but like while I'm creating it, it's like holding some kind of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I believe
it's
it
gotta be,
is. I think it
yeah.
is. And like to your point about like being a conduit and a channel and now like checking the ego, like that's such an incredibly important sort of mentality or attitude to bring to what it is to the creative act itself. Like we have to realize that there's magic and mystery within all of life. And if we try to like control and dictate every little component, we kind of snuff out that. And so we have to like open ourselves to our intuition and into the flow, and also empty ourselves of like attachment and become a literal vessel, an empty vessel for which that kind of intentional energy can move through us, through the way we choose color, through the way we apply paint, through the way that we shift our compositions and so forth. And I get that feeling when I paint, and that's something I try to cultivate through ritual. Like I like I'm sort of always been a person who's really built my life around various kinds of rituals. I just find that to be like a tool, like a really powerful tool to get my mind in resonance, but also to like sort of like set the ground for intention of like what's happening. So even when I enter the studio, I have a start a painting or in the middle of a painting, like returning to it, I have a very sort of like sense of ritual to kind of get myself into that vessel sort of space. Do you
Mm.
build any kind of rituals into your process at this point, or is it just kind of more flowing and intuitive?
There's definitely ritual in the studio. You kind of have to set yourself up, right, to get into that
Mm-hmm.
space. And I definitely cleanse my studio every time that I go down there. So I have a live workspace, and I have a kind of a dungeon-esque basement that is my studio,
Oh,
which is a
nice.
little sad. And I also think I'm trying to create light within the studio because it's, it's in a basement. I don't have amazing like flooding
Yeah.
natural light coming in. I don't have that. So I'm creating light within
You're in
this.
the dream cave.
I'm in the dream cave, totally. Um, yeah, there is a bit of a ritual that happens before I get into that flow state, but I think a lot of it is just turning off the outside world,
Mhm.
not checking my phone, and just being in it, for hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So important because we're so easily distracted
I
with
know.
the way our culture is sort of set up and seems to be evolving through like just the amount of access we have not only to each other, but the amount of access we have to any form of entertainment we could want that could, sort of lull our senses into a place of numbness. Like it can be very numbing, our culture, social media, even just like mainstream media, television, all these programmings that are happening around us, like we can get sucked into them just through the palm of our hand with the phone right there. And so we have to intentionally create space, I think, because the distractibility, I think, is a big hindrance
Mhm.
to that sort of concentrated flow that needs to happen for that energy to move through you. And to your sort of idea around like the work that you make, not only like having a visual sense of like energy, but like you're encoding it on some level through your intention, through the sort of feeling of being a vessel. Like I believe that. I think on some sort of other dimension or quantum level, like you are encoding sort of the molecules, the atoms, the energy that is the painting itself with this kind of resonance of transcendence, of spiritual ideation, of a sense of connectivity to what is in all things and yet feeling like it's beyond at the same time.
Mhm.
So I definitely like personally relate to that. And I do think that when artwork is made from that space in an authentic way, you can feel it. Like
Yeah.
you just feel it. It's like it's just buzzing in every cell in your body. There's sort of like this, like the hair standing up on your skin. You're just like, oh, something's different here. And
Yeah.
that's something I always kind of like look for in artwork, is that sort of subtle, intuitive feeling of connection and resonance with something. And it's very deeply personal too. So like not
Mhm.
everybody is going to see one of your paintings and have that experience, even though it's there,
Mhm.
for many reasons, right? Like our consciousness is so mired in various forms of, like I said earlier, distraction, but also like sensitivity, like what we're sensitive to, can vary from individual to individual. I think you, as artists, like myself and you, like we are probably naturally very sensitive to energy. We're
Mhm.
probably, I would assume, deeply empathic to what's happening around us. So for us, it comes a little easier. So I think that's part of the trick too, is how within our work can we create maybe not only the work itself, but like the condition in which it's experienced? How can that help heighten the experience of connection to some subtler energy that's there as well? Do you think
Mhm.
about that in terms of like how you install your work or how it's displayed to kind of create a container for maybe a subtle transcendent experience?
Definitely. I mean, I'm still very emerging, so I don't necessarily have the luxury of deciding where the works go.
Yeah,
You
yeah, I
kind of
hear
have to,
that.
I was talking to an artist the other day, you kind of have to say yes to everything until you can start saying no.
Hmm.
But I think when I'm envisioning my future and my trajectory and also my legacy, of course, I would love. I mean, I think of Hilma comes to
Yeah,
mind. She knew on some level that she was going to show at the Guggenheim. She didn't know it would be the Guggenheim.
yeah,
She
yeah,
knew it would be in a spiral building. Like
yeah,
it's crazy.
yeah.
That she envisioned that. And
Hmm.
that's where her work would be, and then received, and then able to be understood by the public.
Yes.
And so, absolutely, I think about where the works should be exhibited and the intention and who I show with, and
Hmm.
also where the works end up. I've been really praying that every work that is sold and the new owner of the work is someone who gets it,
Yeah.
and someone who has, good intention for the painting,
Hmm.
and that they understand what it means to now have this piece with them.
Yeah.
And so far, I've been very lucky that all of my collectors have been, they get it.
Yeah, for
They've been
sure.
really wonderful, and they tell me, that they feel the energy from the work and that they are happy to live with it now.
Yeah.
Um, and also there's been kind of a shift to painting floral, like having floral aspects in my work,
Yes.
which I never
Yes.
in a million years thought I would be a flower painter, which I'm not, but I feel this very deep connection to nature. And I think that is because I grew up in the Midwest, and now that I am in this city, and nature is so limited. And when you
Hmm.
do experience nature here, it feels removed from what actual nature is. I'm
Yeah.
so fortunate to have a backyard, but within my backyard, it's like I'm obviously in a city in my backyard, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So it's kind of been these love songs to nature, and to these delicate moments that don't last forever. Flowers
Yeah,
don't, but
exactly.
it lasts a little bit longer in the image of my painting.
Yeah,
But also
no,
that doesn't last forever either, and
exactly.
it ties back to the whole impermanence, and don't connect or don't hang on to something so tightly.
Yeah. Yeah, attachment is such a difficult sort of obstacle to overcome because everything in our sort of like survival tactics that are sort of encoded inside of us want
Mhm.
to hold on to everything because it's a feeling of safety.
Yeah.
And so the feeling of not having something or something passing or changing can be very like threatening to a survivalist instinct. And that's where like the higher levels of consciousness come into play in terms of perspective and
Mhm.
realizing that what it is we think that we need to attach to is ultimately is going to be a futile effort, because no matter how long we grip and hold on, ultimately it will change, it will dissolve, it will transform into something else.
Yeah.
And so that lesson of impermanence is really a beautiful one and a difficult one at the same time to grapple
Mhm.
with. It's something I meditate on a lot. I love to like experience sort of just the immediate sensation of impermanence in every moment. So like when I sit and I meditate, sometimes I'll just focus on just listening and just
Mhm.
hearing the changing sounds around me, this sort of like soundtrack of life that is constantly in flux. And I noticed each change that arises in my field of awareness. I'm like, oh, there's impermanence. There it is again. A bird
Mhm.
chirps here, a car beeps there, the AC clicks on here, like, and you're
Mhm.
just seeing the bubbling, percolating, impermanent nature of just the most minute moments. And to
Mhm.
me, it's like a reminder of like not holding on and
Yeah.
being in the flow of life. So like even these works of art that we make, eventually they'll turn to dust,
Mhm.
right? And so at the end of the day, it's not the artwork itself that matters as much as the experience that the artwork generates within the heart mind of someone who interacts with it. And that, to me, the way I like to think about things, lasts forever. The
Mhm.
experience of like a moment of like transcendence or a moment of deep connection to something beyond the individuated self, like that lasts forever. That has a ripple effect in the universe for all time because it's helping transform and evolve the consciousness of all.
Yeah.
But that's my grandiose sort of perspective. But like that's how I like to live, thinking that way.
Yeah.
But it's a tough lesson to deal with too, because loss is real, grief is real,
Mhm.
and we have to have ways of navigating the truth of all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like detachment and acceptance. And also, I think how you deal with loss and grief, your integrity while you're in pain,
Yeah.
how
Hmm.
do you handle that? Like, where you have to come to, you need to have acceptance. And then, I don't know, I've had tons of loss in my life, and
Yeah.
it's been really interesting to see over the years how I've grown and been able to accept it.
Yeah. And manage it. I
Yeah.
mean, me too. And it never gets easier necessarily, but like I think as your perspective widens and your experience develops in terms of this mystery of life,
Hmm.
you realize that the loss is another form of impermanence too, like the
Hmm.
feeling of that loss, and it will pass. And you have to just sometimes sit with it and be with
Yeah.
it, and let it do its thing. Let the energy of grief move through you. And I think we're seeing more openness to allowing grief to manifest in healthy ways than ever before, as opposed to like sort of this hyper masculine white knuckling pain and grief and sorrow
Hmm.
that sort of permeated our culture for a long time, especially I think of like the 50s and even through like all the 20th century, really. But like now we're having more conversations around people seeking out therapy and like understanding that help is important to get and that we don't need to white knuckle through our whole life through the pain and suffering that we feel, that we can reach out and we can find ways of transmuting those difficult circumstances into something beautiful and positive ultimately. And that's
Hmm.
something that I try to remind myself and remind others who are going through difficult times, because it's inevitable. It's just a mark of existence that you
Hmm.
will experience loss and suffering and difficulty. And it's not necessarily about those things that matter as much as like how you confront it and move through it. That really does. And I think art can be an incredible vehicle for healing, for helping people along that journey of letting go and finding a sense of balance again when their world gets turned upside down.
Hmm.
That's why, and not just visual art, all forms of art, because I think
Hmm.
it does inherently remind us of our interconnectedness in life in some sense.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all interconnected. I think that when you're able to tap into your inner, like the inside, and you can create, I feel when a person does that, they become a better version of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I truly feel that way when I'm creating, and when I'm not, when I take long breaks, which are breaks are necessary,
Yeah. Yeah.
but when I'm not, I do feel like totally devoid of, I don't feel like I have that spark or light within me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I am creating on a consistent basis, I do feel like I am a better person.
Yeah, I agree. I have to take breaks here and there too. I try to always like every day be in a creative mindset. So, like, like instead of having to just paint, sometimes I'll do a little drawing or I'll create something on the computer or I'll just, I don't know, spontaneously like make something with my son, like build something, right? Like having the connection to the creative act is so crucial for my well-being as also because I think that's creativity is sort of the mark of the source of God, of the creator. Like the fact that we can be vessels of creation itself connects us inherently to the creative modes of the universe. And so through creation we are connecting to the creator in some sense, and that creator is not necessarily like some dude with a beard in the sky. Maybe that's how you like to visualize it and it can manifest that way, but it's so much bigger and vaster and multifaceted than just sort of like an image of another human. It's just sort of inherent in all of existence. But
Mm,
there is this creative impetus underneath the surface of everything we see. That's why I've always been fascinated with like sacred geometry and sort
mm,
of mathematics in some ways, because I find that to be sort of a universal language of creative principles of life. So when I'm making art, I feel like I'm connecting through that sort of medium in some way. So I get the same feeling when I'm not making something. I don't really notice that I was a little different until I started making something again. I'm like, oh, this feels different. Okay.
yes,
You know what I'm
100%.
saying?
Oh
Yeah. It's
yeah,
like you don't really
totally.
understand what you're missing until you've like in back in it again sometimes, but
Yeah,
it's just
definitely.
necessary. We can't paint all day, every day. I mean, maybe some people can. life is life,
But yeah.
things get in the way.
Hmm.
That's for sure. How do you go about like generating new ideas, or like how do you go about like when you get in the studio and you're just not really feeling creative or you're not feeling connected, but you just know
Hmm.
you have a show coming up, or you just know like you have to kind of like force yourself to sit down and just get through the difficult beginnings, and something will come. Is there like any sort of way you approach like your own creative process?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get stuck a lot. And instead of sometimes I will just work through it and continue to paint, but I find that if I'm in that headspace, what I'm painting doesn't turn out very great.
Yeah.
So I go for walks. I love going for walks and just
Hmm.
being an observer while
Yeah.
walking because I feel that there, especially in Brooklyn, I mean, there's so much going on all the time,
Yeah.
but I'll walk to anywhere and I
Mm.
just am then clearing my mind, taking in information. And I always have very strange synchronicities on my walks that like aha moments that then
Yeah.
it all makes sense to me. And then I go back down to the dungeon.
Yeah. The dream cave.
And yes, and then and then it happens.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of my remedies for when
Yeah. Just
I'm
getting out in the world.
getting out, sitting in my backyard,
Hmm.
just listening to nature. I mean,
Yeah.
or the limited amount of nature I have in my backyard.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, just things like that where you get out and you breathe that fresh air and then it will come to you, I think. But
Yeah.
or sometimes I'll just lay down the background of a new painting and the
Hmm.
act of doing that, like the physical movement,
Yeah.
and I'm not thinking about really anything, and the
Yep.
possibilities are endless at that point.
Yep.
That can kind of open it up for me too.
Yeah,
So
I feel the same way. Like sometimes when I'm just not sure what to do, like I'll just prep surfaces.
mhm.
I'll get my materials cleaned, or I'll organize some stuff. Like I'll always be trying to do something productive within that creative space. And then eventually, like those, like we were saying earlier, within the impermanence, like it just passes,
It
and then
passes.
opening comes. And so
Mhm.
we can't like live in this like intensity of dire straits. Like I'm never gonna be creative again. Like it will pass. But I think that's a great approach, is like just getting out of your creative space too, going for
Mhm.
walks. I like to read, or I like to just sit and, like I was explaining earlier, like kind of meditate and listen to the world, like kind of observe the world as like a fly on the wall in a way, like without any sort of like intention, without any sort of like agenda, or any sort of like sense of trying to control what's happening, and just be like an objective observer of just the majesty of this moment.
Yeah.
And it's been such a blessing to develop access to that feeling, because I can recall earlier in my life, especially as a teenager, filled with lots of angst, and I was such a rebel and always questioning everything, and
Mhm.
kind of really living in my head a lot. I didn't really have access to being able to, like, I never felt empowered to find those moments of like peace and solace and sort of like calm clarity until I was kind of in my early 20s. And my life has just changed so dramatically since I've developed those tools of access to those spaces. Do you have any sort of like formal meditative practice? Are you interested in like learning those things? Because I know discovering Ram Dass has just opened the doors to so many amazing practices and traditions, not only within meditation, but breath work, psychedelic healing, and all these things. Have these become a part of like your like life path in a way that might have been new because of your discovery and connection with Ram Dass?
Definitely. I mean, I've tried several things. I don't necessarily do something regularly, which I need to,
Oh,
but it's hard. Well, actually, I will say that exercising is a form of meditation, and
mm-hmm,
I really enjoy running. And
mm-hmm.
so when I am exercising, everything kind of like when I'm in the studio
Yeah.
falls away. All the crazy thoughts, every worry that I have is gone.
Mm-hmm,
And connecting with my physical body in that way is so incredible, and being
mm-hmm. I
tuned with my
agree.
body. So I will say that that's actually a form of meditation for me. I have done a breathwork class before, and going in, and this was pre-pandemic, so this was a
Yeah.
while ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
I went into it thinking that it was going to be like a very calming experience. And I was sorely mistaken.
Oh no, it's so
We
intense.
were in a room with probably 50 other people. My friend and I went together, and it
Mm.
was so shocking.
Yeah.
I didn't expect, I mean, to hear everyone breathing in unison because you're doing it's breath work, so it's not
Yeah.
normal breathing.
Yeah.
And then to hear people crying and laughing, and it was just a bit overstimulating. And
Yeah.
I became very emotional, and I couldn't connect to what the emotions were, but I knew that they were leaving my body.
Mm-hmm.
And that alone was just wonderful.
Yeah.
Um, so, and I haven't done that again because it was quite intense. But
Yeah.
honestly, I think I probably should.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my, I think, pain and sadness stores within my body, and I can't
Mm-hmm.
quite access it and release it. So that's a really
Mm-hmm.
good way of doing it.
Yes, I agree 100%. Yeah,
But
breath work is yeah, it's not I mean, you can vary your breath in ways to get into those calmer states, but when we talk about breath work, like workshops, everybody out there, like it's work, it's hard, it's exhausting, it's physical, but it is like such a release of energy. It is
mhm,
such a magical practice. I don't know if you're aware of Stanislav Grof, who was I think he's still alive today. He's an older man. I think he's Czech. He's a psychologist who was really deeply invested in the 60s and 70s and researching psychedelics for therapeutic use. He actually was kind of laying the groundwork for what's being done today at major universities across and major institutions across the world in terms
mhm,
of like discovering therapeutic protocols for psychedelic usage. He was the one who really kind of started all that. And then when it became Schedule One and he couldn't do that research anymore, he developed what's called holotropic breath work. So
uh-huh,
he discovered that you can breathe in certain patterns of intensity that can actually manifest psychedelic states and forms of psychedelic healing. And so he sort of really, at least in the West, began that kind of process. And it is very healing for a lot of people. And there is a deep connection to breath work with in ancient spiritual traditions like the yogic and Vedic traditions,
mhm,
doing pranayama practice, right? Like doing breath work practices. I think of Tibetan Tumo practices for breath work. So there is sort of a historical framework for this kind of spiritual practice. But now we're seeing, more access to these kinds of spaces. And I always encourage people to do it. I think
mhm.
even if you're someone who doesn't think they have any healing to do, we all do.
Oh yeah.
We
Always.
all do. Well, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Again, this is just my opinion, caveat there, but I feel like that's probably why we all exist on this plane is we have work to do on ourselves.
Mhm, mhm,
Our guru, our teacher Ram Dass says, it's like we're all here in school, and each of us has a different curriculum, and all we have to do is just take our curriculum, and that
mhm.
is basically our karma, our life. We have to live our life
Yeah,
and let that lead us. But I think those practices are really helpful and healing. Have you had any experience with psychedelics? Has that been a part of your spiritual journey thus far? Is that something you're interested in?
definitely. I think microdosing can be extremely beneficial, and they say that microdosing psilocybin can be an alternative for depression
Mm-hmm.
medication, which
Yeah,
I think is huge. And
huge.
these studies coming out are just, I mean, the mushroom, I'm really into Paul Stamets.
Yes, I love
He's
Paul Stamets.
a
Oh
famous
man.
mycologist,
Oh
and
yes.
mushrooms are alien, I think.
They're magical. It is
They
crazy.
really are magical. And so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I have done that, and I think I found it to be extremely beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
But with anything, you have to be extremely careful,
Yes.
especially when it can alter your state of mind.
Yes.
You
Mm-hmm.
don't want to take it too far, like anything,
Yep.
you
Mm-hmm.
fall into a psychosis, but
Yeah. Well, intention
so
is key in treating these
intention,
substances as sacred and
right?
not as like a frivolous party drug. Now, I've done that in my past unknowingly, but now that I know better about sort of these spaces and
Hmm.
these compounds, like I treat them with great reverence and
Hmm.
understand that they have a wisdom and knowledge, and this sounds trippy to people who haven't ever experienced a psychedelic trip, but like there is a wisdom and knowledge within these compounds that I think are really important for our evolution as a human species. And we can look to our ancient past and the usage of these compounds being very, very prevalent in not only indigenous cultures across the planet, but even in the burgeoning Western culture of ancient Greece. I think of
Mm,
the illusion mystery schools of ancient Greece. And we know through this researcher, Brian Marescu, he wrote this incredible book called The Immortality Key, where he's been researching ancient use of psychedelic compounds, discovered within their these vessels that they would drink wine out of in these like illusion rituals
yeah.
was ergot, which
Yes.
is like the fungus of that LSD is derived from, and other
Mhm.
and cannabis and other psychoactive compounds. So I think this has been a huge part of our history of civilization, and it got snuffed out through the 20th century through just, I mean, a lot of terrible reasons. But now I feel grateful that like science is taking this seriously again, and people are getting tremendous benefit, especially when it's treated with a sense of reverence and sacredness, and you're controlling those conditions. Like you're not just taking like 3 hits of acid and going to run through the subway systems of New York City. It's a
That
bad
sounds
idea.
terrifying.
It's a bad idea. That's
Yeah, it's a
not
really bad idea.
it's a really, yeah, bad idea out there. Like you want to do it within like with someone you feel safe with, someone who can sit with you and can be a sense of a ground for you as you explore these vast realms of your consciousness.
Mhm.
And I think when you control for those parameters, a lot of time, the vast majority of times, people are having very amazing insights that transform their lives forever. Um,
Absolutely. I mean, I think
and
of Terrence McKenna,
mhm.
they all were, I mean, he was wildly ahead of his time and
Oh
predicted
my
a lot
gosh,
of what
yeah.
we're experiencing now, which is
Yes.
pretty eerie but
Yeah.
incredible. Um, I mean, I think, within 10 years, this will be just a part of the system of healing,
Hmm.
and it's not going to be taboo and people,
Yes, I pray. Yeah.
yeah, I really think so. But it's like it's a gift. It's a part of the world, the natural world, and we have access to it, and we have
Hmm.
access to it for a reason.
Yes,
So,
definitely. I agree. I mean, I feel like we like these plant compounds work with us, are like
mhm,
helping us in some way. And I feel like because of like the contentious times we live in, rife with such a sense of separation and inequality and divisiveness that's happening. Like
mhm,
these compounds are unifiers in my
mhm,
experience.
mhm.
And the fact that they're becoming more, flooding into the mainstream, and more people are doing it who maybe 10 years ago would have never considered taking a mushroom trip, right?
Yeah.
Or doing ketamine and cannabis, or doing an acid trip, or going down to Costa Rica or South America and doing yahe or ayahuasca. But now, like more and more people than ever are doing this, and I think that's going to change the vibrational frequency of our culture for better, especially if we can find good ways of integration. I think that's the key,
Yeah.
because anybody who has a huge psychedelic experience, if they don't have a sense of ground and understanding of how to integrate the immensity of what might have occurred into their day-to-day life, it kind of dissolves and disappears like a memory. It becomes fuzzy in the backdrop. And so
Yeah.
I think what we're going to need to be armed with societally is teams of people becoming psychedelic integrationists, people
Hmm.
who can help others understand their experience and take the wisdom and knowledge and healing from it and apply it in their daily life. Because practically, if it doesn't do that, it's not going to have the tremendous healing benefit that it could. And
Right.
I look at art as being, and artists as being part of that team of integrationists, of how we can ground such transcendent experiences
Hmm.
in the earthly plane in such a way that it can change the way we operate for better.
Totally.
That's how I sort of see it. I think artists always have played this role of in some sense, not all artists, but I think in an archetypal sense, like similar to a shaman. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know. I just get that feeling like someone
Mhm.
who's not only holding spiritual space, but also helping generate maps of how to navigate these spaces and being there to
Mhm.
hold people's hands and being there as signposts to say, I go this way or that way.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, we have to take our journey ourselves, but that's how I view artists as well in some ways.
Yeah, I do too. And I hope for me as an artist that what I create and that goes out into the world, which are my paintings, I hope they give something, whether it's a connection, give the viewer a connection to something higher than themselves. I hope that
Hmm.
I am, a conduit of that, or I hope that
Yeah.
what I'm creating is helping someone connect or feel at peace or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I'm just like doing my little tiny part in this
Hmm.
massive universe
Yes.
to help raise the consciousness.
Yes.
And from a place of zero ego, I
Yes.
don't want, because the art world can be, I mean, I consider it to be very parallel to Hollywood.
Hmm.
It's about it's like popularity and fame and money and all of these things cloud what's really happening here, which is us as creators, creating art. And
Hmm.
so that's something that I constantly remind myself, don't get caught up in the worldly aspect of it. Don't get caught up in, the market and the industry of it.
Yeah.
Stay on the path, Callie.
Definitely, right? I was actually talking about this with another artist the other day, and just about like market influences and how we have to really be careful.
Mhm.
Because what can happen is you can get pulled into this commercial setting in such a way that it's dictating your decision making or your ability to channel the work
Mhm.
that you're making. And it's a delicate balance too, because I think at the end of the day, sustainability as an artist is so important. Like if this is your life path and this is something you are authentically dedicating every ounce of your being to doing, you have a right to make a living doing that.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
and be sustainable in that space. But
Mhm.
like anything, the ego can easily adopt the spirit, and so we have to be able to recognize when that's happening, like having a sense of groundedness and a sense of like putting the ego in its place. Like Ram Dass talked about this all the time, like the role of the ego versus
Yeah.
the role of the spirit, and the ego's here to serve the spirit, not vice versa. And
Uh-huh.
so we always have to play with that, because the art world can be one that sort of ignites the ego. Artists have egos. We are artists. We're going to have
Yeah.
big egos that we have to manage and we have to put in their place and use. It's a tool for us at the end of the day. It's not who we are. And like we were saying earlier, all the money and success that goes away anyway. So really what matters is how we influence the well-being of another person through our creative act. And so
Mhm.
always trying to check in with yourself is really important to make
Mhm.
sure that you're in alignment. And I think that's a daily process. At least for me, it is. It's a daily process of realignment, of
Mhm.
constantly noticing when my ego is inflated and sort of unraveling and dragging me through the mud, and just
Mhm.
having some grace and loving kindness to be like, okay, let's reel it in. Let's
Yeah.
reverse the role again and get back to what we're really here to do, which is
Yep.
to inspire and to connect and create a ground of deeper resonance amongst all beings,
Mhm.
to recognize our interdependent nature through the way that we live, like the way that we act in the world.
Yeah.
That makes the biggest difference. So I think you are doing it, Callie. Like you are
Oh,
doing it. You
thank
have to
you.
just continue to stay aligned and continue to work with yourself to recognize when things drift, you come back. When you drift, you
Mhm.
come back. It's an ever flowing process. But I believe the same thing. Like if you are authentically engaging in your creativity and the work that you do with the intention of connecting and being of service to others on some subtle, fundamental spiritual plane, then like you're going to be doing that. It's going to happen, and it has happened, and people will ultimately benefit from the interaction with your own spiritual output. It's going
Mhm.
to help at the very least bolster their confidence or their connection to their own spiritual source.
Mhm.
That's a beautiful thing to be a part of. And I
Mhm.
see it's so wonderful that not only artists are open to speaking about this feeling like you are,
Mhm.
but that now we're seeing curators and gallerists and even collectors and people within the institutional frameworks that kind of control the markets of art starting to be more open-minded
Mhm.
to what was once considered taboo or woo-woo, or what the sort of art world, quote unquote, was sort of semi-allergic to the word spirit. Um,
Yeah, I
so
know. And the
yeah,
shift is happening. We're seeing it. This is the
mhm,
beginning of it.
it
And I think,
is.
people like Agnes Pelton and Hilma Afklint from they paved the pathway for us, right?
Mhm.
They walked so we could run kind of sense.
Yes,
But
yes.
I mean that, it's happening and I'm really excited. And it's really
Mhm.
interesting too that this is now the art world is opening up to it just as I'm kind of taking off with my paintings where I feel like this is now a lifetime of work that I
Yes.
can dive into.
Yeah.
And I feel that these new paintings that I'm creating are the beginning of my trajectory forever
Yes.
until I
A hundred.
die.
Yes, because
And
they're
so,
feeding your soul deeply.
yeah.
Like you know that the work you're making is not only healing for yourself, but it's holding a resonant that has the potential to help others heal. And when we feel ourselves connected to the space of service, that like what we do is not only helping us, but helping others, that's the whole game, is to find that. I think that's what we're all searching for, is how to play a role in this world in such a way that we can be a benefit through our gifts and through our talents and through our energy and how we direct it.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess to go full circle, isn't that kind of what everyone is seeking when they
Hmm.
seek out Christ, God, Allah, whoever,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
source, you know what I mean?
yeah, yes,
So yeah, but it's a very exciting time right now in the
it
art world.
is.
Just
It
seeing.
is. And we need to come together. We need to,
Mhm.
and that's part of what's driven me to sort of develop this project of connecting with people like yourself, is to, it's a movement and it's bigger than one person, and
Mhm.
we need to continue to connect and collaborate, create a sense of community, and create a sense of like that this is not a blip of a trend, but this is something that is going to sustain and last, that future generations of artists will be able to take the torch and move it even further, and push sort of like how we can cultivate a sense of spiritual connection through the creative act and through the creative experience itself. So it's a really special time, Callie, and
It is.
yeah, and I'm so grateful to connect with you in this way, and I'm just so like in love with the paintings that you're doing. I can't wait
Oh,
to
thank
see
you so
them in
much.
person. I know there
Yes,
will be a
come to New York.
time.
Come
I
to New
know
York.
I will.
Yeah.
Definitely going to get up there, and I definitely see like moving into the future ways. I'm envisioning ways in which we can practically work together
Mhm.
in these spaces, like all of us, and it's just really special and exciting, and I feel it makes me feel very hopeful for the future, especially within such difficult times that we're in. But I feel like as anyone knows who goes through difficulties in their life, that they end up laying the groundwork for some incredibly powerful evolutionary processes to happen. And so I kind of see on some microcosmic level, like the strife and difficulty and contentiousness is actually laying groundwork for something so big and beautiful that we can't comprehend just yet. And
Oh
we just have
yeah.
to stay the path, stay in
Yeah,
alignment.
totally.
So,
Well, I was listening to Ram Dass right before this, and he said, I love suffering. I love suffering because it brings me closer to Christ.
yeah,
And it's just
right.
like,
What a
it's true.
paradox. It is
I
true,
know.
but it's such a paradox. Like life is not so black and white. There's so much gray area and nuance.
Hmm.
And the rational logical mind is not capable of fully comprehending the immensity of reality. It is
Hmm.
able to understand certain avenues of it, but like there's something bigger beyond the rational logical mind that
Hmm.
transcends what our sort of linguistic frameworks of life is, and we have to be able to accept that. because I
Mhm.
think that's probably some of the source of the issues we're facing today is the ego's attachment to logic and rationality as the end all be all of the human consciousness.
Mhm.
And that's just not what it is. And it's just
Mhm.
not. It's definitely an important component, but it's not the
Yeah.
whole picture.
Yeah.
So we just got to keep plugging along, Calli, and keep doing
Yep.
what you're doing. Immerse yourself in
You
the dream
too. Yes.
cave.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's a beautiful path that you're on, and I'm so grateful to connect with you. And everybody out there, check the show notes. There's going to be links to Calli's work, to her Instagram page. Just stay connected with her, follow her, make sure you see all the incredible work that she is putting out into the universe. And I know there's so many amazing things to come. So thanks
Thank you
again for your
so much,
time.
Martin. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. We'll
Thank
talk
you.
very soon. All right. Take
Okay.
care.
Sounds good. All
All
right.
right.
Bye.
Peace. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Concerning the Spiritual and Art. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay in touch and in tune with all the amazing offerings that we're going to be bringing to this channel. Thanks again for all your support. Super grateful, and excited to bring more content your way. Peace, y'all.